Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel called zuzanareacts, where I learn all things Bharat with your help, and I just share my Central European Slovak point of view. And today's video is going to be a tiny bit of a different one. A lot of you are asking me about Slovakia, and many of you are saying in the comments that you don't even know where Slovakia is. And also from many comments and conversations, it's maybe uncertain for you to fully understand how Europe works. And I found a very interesting video, which was called like explaining Europe for Americans, and I thought this could be a really good video to maybe talk about Europe and how things are around here, so you understand and you get a better, deeper, maybe context into things. And even though it's for Americans, there will be, she's talking in the video more like to an American audience, but just forget about that part and the American tries to explanation type of things. But I found it very, very interesting and very good just to share about Europe more deeply. So please do ignore those American kind of references and stuff. But before we jump into today's video,
please like this video and click on the subscribe button and turn on the notification. Thank you so much for your support.
Okay, let's get started. I'm sure I'll be jumping into the video many times, trying to maybe elaborate, add on, etc., so you get a better understanding. So let's get into it.
Europe, the land of weird European movies, the metric system, the relaxed laws of underage drinking, and the starter of both world wars. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of information about Europe, and it's been a bit misguided. So here, I present to you a little crash course about this part of the world. So let's start off with geography. Unfortunately, or fortunately, Europe does not look like this. It looks like this. Europe has over 40 countries, so it's much more than just France, Germany, and Italy. And saying you visited Europe is a very broad term, because this part of Europe is very different from this part of Europe. The biggest country in Europe is Russia, and the smallest country in Europe is the Vatican City, which is basically a giant building with a giant park. Europe can be divided depending on how you look at it. It can be divided politically, geographically, or historically. For example, here, the east from the west, and here, the red from the green from the turquoise, or potato-tomato regions. So let's look at the general way of how Europe can be divided. Firstly on the list is, of course, Western Europe. These are the countries that people want to move in, live in, and be born in. They are economically better off, and they have a lot of work opportunities. These countries include Germany, France, Austria, Belgium, and if you don't count the British Islands as their separate thing, then they also are in the west of Europe. Next up we have Northern Europe. A lot of these countries are doing great, or even they're better off in terms of quality of life. Except for Sweden, it's having a rough patch with crimes, apparently. But they're pretty cold, and in the winter it gets really dark, so not a lot of people want to move there necessarily. Not only are they cold when it comes to weather, but also when it comes to their friendliness scale. They're usually considered a bit more unfriendly or reserved. These countries are also referred to as Nordic or Scandinavian countries. They have a lot of Viking heritage, and they like to fish. They have a lot of fish and water around them. Moving on to...
Okay, before she moves on, Nordic countries are almost like an example for the rest of the Europe, where everything apparently works really well and people are happy and all that kind of stuff. Yes, they are known kind of to be the reserved. They're very much not like the foreigners, and by that I mean anyone else that is not them. And it's actually not super accurate what she's saying, because a lot of migrants that we have, they actually, apart from moving to Germany or any other Western Europe, they actually, one of their destination is like Sweden, and it's because of their good welfare system. You pay as a lot of taxes over there, but the system there is very good. Still, I think even despite whatever is happening in Sweden, I still feel like it's a pretty safe country. You, let's say, leave toys I know that from my friend's experience, that has kids and lives there. You leave toys on the playground, no one is going to touch it. So it's very, in a way, safe society. It's just the weather. I could not imagine possibly putting myself voluntarily through that weather. But let's continue.
Southern Europe. These are the countries that people like to visit on vacation. They're warm, maybe too warm for some people, and by some people I mean me. They have great food and wine, they're pretty friendly.
No, it's even for the British, it's too hot. Anything that's not the UK weather is outside, for them, it's too hot.
And some of them like to take naps in the middle of the day, which sounds like a dream. But their economy is not doing that great. And if you're wondering why is this section a darker orange, well, I'll get to that in a bit. And now,
okay, so the reason why they're not doing so for the other Europeans, it might be, so the sentiment would be that the people in those warmer parts are actually lazy. I said it. That's kind of what we think, that people they're not from those countries, even though I was told like it's not true. But like, let's look at the bankruptcy of Greece, you know, Italy, Spain, not great economically. They're not really doing great. In fact, what's interesting for you to know is that people from these countries, I haven't seen much Greek people, but definitely like Italians or Spanish and Portuguese, they're actually coming to Central Europe for jobs. Like I met so many in Poland, in Warsaw, when I lived there. In Slovakia, there is also a lot of them, because we have a big corporations like Amazon, or, you know, things like that, moving here. So we get a lot of foreigners, and they come also, interestingly, from these countries. And that means that Central Europe is doing way better than they are economically. So they come here to seek a job. But let's continue.
Now we have Eastern Europe. Well, the problem with Eastern Europe is that nobody wants to be called Eastern Europe. This division is based on the time when the Fire Nation attacked, so a lot of these countries were occupied. Since East of Europe is not the best area to be associated with, countries like to identify themselves with other names. For example, Romania, Croatia likes to be called the Balkans. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are the Baltics, but to be honest, they're quite high up geographically, so maybe they could be considered even Northern Europe. Poland, Czech Republic, and Slovakia likes to be called the Central Europe.
And even Hungary, but I'll add a bit more.
We're left with countries that are not doing that great for multiple reasons. And I would say maybe they would rather be called Slavic countries rather than Eastern Europe. You can be both, but one of them sounds a bit more cool than the other one. So if you agree with the concept of Central Europe, then scratch whatever I said before about Europe looking like this. Now Europe looks like this. And I have to say I have nothing against being called Central Europe or the existence of Central Europe. I think it's just funny how nobody wants to be called Eastern European. So then lastly, we have Central Europe. Basically all the German-speaking countries and more. These countries are located in the core economic region of Europe. They have stable governments and a relatively high quality of life. And these countries also love beer, and they like to fight on who drinks the most beer. This is an interesting correlation I found. Not that it's related to geography, but it's an interesting fact. With all that said, the number one thing you should remember is that Europe is not a country. It is a continent that has a lot of countries. And
okay, I'll pause it here. So the thing is, what she's talking about, Eastern Europe, is correct. Her map is interesting sometimes, but yes, no, people, it does depend. I have friends that are calling Slovakia Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe is a political division. Central Europe is geographical division. Yes, the reason why you don't want to be called Eastern Europe is simply because it has negative connotation. It feels like, you know, when people, let's say in the UK, let's say from Eastern Europe, it means that you're backwards, right? You don't want to be associated with that. And especially when, you know, when I first came from Slovakia to the UK, and I observed their housing, and the way of living. And I was like, and we're backwards. Like our houses, our standards for cleanliness and everything are 10 times higher. So, you know, so this is why I don't want to be, for example, I always say Central Europe because the Eastern has a negative connotation. It has a connotation from, you know, it's post-communistic bloc. It's all these post-communistic countries that are underdeveloped. And if you compare it to, I don't know, the UK, you know, there are things where I would say we are way, way, way more ahead than the UK. So I just don't want to be, you know, associated with a negative connotation, especially if it's not right. But again, I said many people will even say about themselves it's Eastern Europe, but I prefer like a correct placement, which is Central Europe, which is geographically correct. And yeah, and then I think in Central Europe is, you know, she keeps on forgetting Hungary. Hungary is really an anomaly in Europe among Slavic nations. But it is what it is. They enslaved Slovakia for thousands of years. And yeah, they are a big anomaly over here. And yeah, I would prefer a term Central Europe. This is why I always talk about Central Europe. So it has normal connotation.
If you know where the capital of Paris, Berlin, and London is, you're doing a good job and you should pat yourself on the shoulder. And I definitely don't expect you to know where Malta is, which is right here, and it's very small. I don't even expect people from France to know the capital of Latvia. So if you know a little bit about this place, it's already pretty good. I think one of the most important things is just not to make assumptions. For example, calling Lithuania basically Russia is very disrespectful. Or Ireland is the same as UK. Not a good thing to do. So maybe open a map before opening your mouth. Just a friendly suggestion. And also maybe it's helpful to know the difference between Europe and European Union.
Okay, so before we jump into that, so I want you to pay particular attention when she says, we're happy if you at least know that there is a Berlin or there is France and there is London. No one in Europe cares or is precious about foreigners knowing ins and outs of Europe. No one cares. No one really like, oh yeah, yeah. It's just not the thing. And I love the fact that she talked about it. And the reason why I love the fact, because when I talked to you in the comments, not so much recently, but before, it was like, oh, you should know everything basically about India. How dare you? You're a small country. Of course, people, excuse me, don't know about you, but you should know about India. India is this. And I personally don't believe this is the right attitude. We are very much like what she said, and I'm so happy that I found this video so you can visibly see that people just, we don't have that attitude. We are aware that the world is a big place and that diversity is huge. And we don't expect anyone to basically almost know anything about Europe if you're not from here, you know? And even people from, you know, from France or from the UK will not know anything about Slovakia. And that's a fact. And no one gets offended. So sometimes I really don't get those comments when, you know, they're almost feeling, to me, at least the way I'm translating them in my head, maybe they're not intended that way, is like, how dare I not to know about India? But I think it's pretty normal. I'm not, and I'm coming from the mentality of not expecting. So I'm not too sure why there is such a strong opinion on like everyone should kind of know things about, you know, Bharat. Like, I have a personal interest in it, and this is why I'm learning. But she's a prime example of how we think about it. We don't expect anything from anyone, and I don't think any nation should be in those expectations that we know everything about everything. I think it's humanly impossible.
Which I'll cover that in a bit. And now we can move on to history. Mm-hmm. Well, Europeans have a lot of beef with each other. UK and Ireland, Romania and Hungary, Portugal and Spain, and Russia with basically everybody in the world. And it's all because of history. Europe has a lot of it. There were a lot of agreements, disagreements, and wars over land in the past and also now. Some stuff is serious and some stuff ended up countries just making fun of each other. For example, Austria making fun of Germany, France and the Netherlands making fun of Belgium, or the whole Scandinavian area making fun of the Danes because of their weird sounding language. Because of history, we have cities like this that were weirdly divided between Netherlands and Belgium. They even have houses that are divided into two, so pretty strange. And we also have a city like this in the Baltics, between Estonia and Latvia. Then when you compare Europe to the US, you can see that America is actually bigger in size than Europe, much bigger. Europe is 2/3 of America. But the main difference between these two is that one of them is much more densely populated than the other. The US has 300 million people living in there, and Europe has 700 million. And yet they're smaller in size. Each country here has their own rules, their own languages, their own culture, and so a more accurate comparison would be something like this. Every country is their own little America. And what I mean by that, we can take a look at Germany, for example. The country is divided into 16 states, and this Germany is very different. They also sound very different. When they talk to each other, they might not even understand each other. Plus, we also have Austria right here that also speaks German, but their German is very different from the standard German. But they are right next to each other. So how did this happen? History and culture and a lot of the stuff in between. Then we can also look at UK, which is fully separated from Europe by water. Here the country is divided into 4 regions, which is Scotland, Wales, England, and Northern Ireland. But if you look deeper under the surface, it's also divided into smaller regions. And if you try harder, you can also divide it into just towns, cities, and villages. The UK is an interesting example of how the language and the culture developed a little bit differently, even though they're right next to each other and the country is quite small. Here, people can recognize your status or class based on where you grew up in, which is a thing, I suppose. Now, let's talk about the economical state of Europe.
Okay, before we jump into the economical state of Europe, so we've talked about a lot diversity, and I think this is a prime example where I feel like I keep on failing explaining to you that that how Europe is diverse. And I think she did a really good job in explaining that imagine every country in Europe is like a little India. You know, and even India is made up of many territories and states. So this is kind of what it is. Like, it's just so hard because everyone is just so vastly culturally different. And I know that there are cultural differences, but also there are cultural differences in America. But Americas are under one constitution, one everything. Whereas India is also in that sense, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm perceiving in the sense that you have one constitution, everyone is aware that they're Bharatian, etc., just from different regions. Here, you don't have that. It does not exist. It's like many, exactly what she said, many different Indias. Every country has their own constitution, own heritage. It's very different. It's very, very different. This is why the European project is very, very tricky, because there isn't the whole European consciousness or the European Union, which I'm sure it's going to touch base upon. It's an artificial concept. You know, for Bharat, it's natural because it's a subcontinent. It has a certain region division. It's been like that for centuries, and even Europe has been like obviously different countries. It's just very different. It's like exactly what she says. Imagine every single country being like a small India. And that is how I would want you to think about. And that is where I draw the diversity. And this is where I think the discord or dissonance happens when I try to explain this to you. Again, I'm not too sure if I'm able to, if you're able to get what I'm trying to say. But I hope that it sinks at some point. So economy.
Firstly, let's cover what is the EU, or European Union, as they say. It is an international organization comprising of 27 countries that govern common social, economic, and security policies. EU is in Europe, but the whole Europe is not in the EU. Just like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square. What I mean is that not all European countries are a part of this. Some do want to join and some want to leave, for a variety of reasons. From my understanding, this is the EU flag, not the Europe flag, but we do use it as a Europe flag to represent the unity of Europe, which is a little bit confusing, but there's not much I can do. The nice part about the EU is that a lot of European countries share the same currency, which is the euro currency. Not all of them use euros, but many do. These countries like to stick to their currencies. So if you try and buy some groceries with your American dollars, you will most likely be rejected. Unless you're in an airport or some kind of tourist hotspot, then it will not go that well. I mean, would you sell me a sandwich if I say I have 200,000 Animal Crossing bells? Probably not. And if you said yes, I'm not sure about your business practices. 20 EU countries use euros, but in total it's 27 because some countries decided to make it their currency unofficially. But not all EU countries switched to euro, and some of them still stayed with their old currency. So if you're traveling to those countries, check ahead what kind of money do they use. And ignore UK because I forgot they decided to leave or they already left. So they're just doing their own thing. But many countries over the years did switch to using euros, which is very convenient when you travel. But as a Latvian, I remember having lats and being very sad that we're going to switch to euros now. The only reason I didn't want it to happen because I really liked this coin and, you know, nostalgia reasons and cultural reasons. But now I don't have to exchange my currency or try and always calculate in my mind how much is this in lats or how much is this in euros. So overall, a good thing, I think. You can let me know if you have an opinion about this. Now, the last thing on our list is culture.
Okay, so I'll just jump here. Slovakia is within the Central European region as the only country that has euros. Like Hungary has their own currency, Poland, Czech Republic. Obviously, Austria, if you put it in Central Europe, does have euros as well, and it is super convenient. I also remember the times when Slovakia switched to euros, the prices has escalated quite dramatically. But in hindsight, I still think it's a good thing. I love the fact that you can just travel within Europe and you can have the same currency. You don't need to worry for the exchange. And, you know, like the thought just flashed through my mind saying like, you know, maybe in Bharat, when you move from state to state, it doesn't feel like a foreign land, but it feels like you're going to a foreign land even within Europe. That's how you're thinking. It's just like you're going to Hungary, and Hungary enslaved Slovakia for 1,000 years. It's a very, very different land, even though there are certain like similarities. They have similar DNA, all that kind of jazz, because basically they moved into Slavic territory, by the way. But it just feels like you're going to a very foreign country. The only country that wouldn't feel for Slovaks that foreign would be Czech Republic. But still, it's like a whole different world. Like if you would be going from India to, I don't know, China. That is how we feel about every country. That it's like, maybe China is a good example. Like you're going to something that is just so culturally different to you or just very foreign to you. But let's continue with culture.
America is not Europe, and Europe is not America. We run things differently around here. Like, for example, it's very rare to find a building that has central AC. Most of us just have a big heat wave in the middle of the summer and we suffer for 2 weeks and then it's all good. But the normal AC is a bit more common in South.
Well, it's just not quite the case. Like, for example, in Slovakia, summer's going to be super hot. Like, we can have... it used to be like we used to have normal seasons, and it used to be for at least a decade where, well, from one day to another, you jump into summer right away. I personally have AC in my apartment, and because my apartment is facing, you know, like the what is it, the western side where the sun sticks in the afternoon, it's just unbearable. But yeah, we get a really nice, really hot weather in summer as well, for which you actually do need AC, and you're blessed if you have one, but it's not usual for people to do that. I think nowadays people are installing it because it's become cheaper, etc. But yeah, it can get very hectic. We do also get over 40 degrees in here, and when you're not at least at the sea or somewhere surrounded by mountains, it's called good luck truck.
Southern Europe, but not everywhere. In some ways, we're not that different from you. And maybe we're not even better than you, but we certainly think we are. I mean, we also have McDonald's, and we do like our convenient cars, but we're not that obsessed with it. And our cities don't look like the medieval times. I mean, some do, but we certainly stopped throwing trash out of the windows and burning witches. As mentioned before, Europe has a lot of countries, so there's a lot of different cultures, foods, traditions, and preferences. And so I gathered some cultural things to generally know about Europe. The first thing on my list is that you're probably not Italian. If the only thing that makes you Italian is that you took an ancestry test that told you that your blood is 57% Italian, you're probably not Italian. It doesn't count if you have Italian ancestors from the 1800s that settled to America. If you didn't grow up in Italy, you don't have any Italian relatives, like grandparents, parents, or aunts and uncles, and you don't know how to speak Italian, I'm sorry to say this, but you're not Italian. Being able to pronounce mozzarella correctly, or having a family recipe of spaghetti and meatballs doesn't give you an Italian passport. Plus, spaghetti and meatballs is an Italian-American dish. They don't really eat that in Italy. Don't get me wrong, it's a nice fact and it's fun to know where your ancestors came from, but it doesn't mean that you have the right to claim to be this nationality. Then, a lot of people here are bilingual, but that does not mean that they know English.
I'm just going to post it right here. This is clearly a reference for the American audience. They do all what she said. Like, I don't know, they feel like they need to have a bit more of a history than the American history. And I think she's very much on the point. Let's continue. I think there might be now a bit more American references, what I mentioned at the start, but at least you get also some other perspective.
Oftentimes in most schools, you learn 3 languages. Your language, the neighboring country's language, and most likely English, or whatever else you want to learn. But that does not mean everybody speaks English or want to speak English. So it's always nice to learn a little bit before you come here. Even just knowing how to say please and thank you is already something. Then thirdly, in Eastern Europe and in Northern Europe, people don't really like small talking with strangers. Plus, walking and smiling alone is considered weird. They probably will think you're crazy. People here are reserved and cold because it probably is cold most of the time, and they don't like to waste their energy on things that don't really matter. So if you see them smiling, it's most likely sincere. Then next we have...
Okay, so this is very much true. About also our end of the world. Some people may think we're not friendly, etc., but it's not the case. Also, the fact that Central European region is widely, historically white, it's very tricky. You know, like people would be afraid, which is only natural, especially if you haven't traveled, to be scared. And that's where I think certain things are coming from. And when she talked about language, yeah, but I feel like at least in, like, the languages are really improving. I had to study 3, but you don't study like neighboring language, at least where I'm from. And maybe that's what she's from. She said Lithuania or Latvia. Maybe that's what they do over there. We don't. I had only, no, actually I only had 2. I had English and German, and that's pretty much it. When I lived in Hungary, I learned a bit Hungarian. But yeah, there's still, like, especially like a generation over 50s, they don't really speak any language. So it's a hit or miss here. But for most of the part, young people do speak a lot of English.
Sundays. Some countries consider Sunday as a holy day, so a lot of shops and grocery stores are closed, or they might not be open at their usual schedule. Germany and Poland are quite serious about it, so you'll just have to deal with it. Food is also a big part of our culture, so here is a subsection about food and restaurants. Well, first of all, let's talk about additives. The EU is cautious of what we put in our food. As you can see, the fries from McDonald's. Here is a list of ingredients in the UK, which I think by that time was part of the EU. And here is a list of ingredients that they use in the US. Way more things that I don't know what they are. Don't get me wrong, we have many ingredients that start with the letter E and end with the number, but we are very selective of which ones we want to bring into our club. What I've learned from food theory is that EU takes the approach of guilty until proven innocent, meaning if the additives are proven to not be harmful, then they're accepted into our food chain. Each country has their own specialties and traditional foods, so there's lots to experience and to try. So we'll probably find it a little bit weird if you stick to McDonald's and Starbucks and Dunkin' that you can find back at home a 10-minute drive away from your house. But I do have to say, if you're going to these places to find something new, something that is not sold in your country, then I think it's fine. I've done it for some reason.
Okay, so I'll stop quickly here just to mention Slovakia had a way higher food standards before joining the EU. Just so you know, we had to drop. And English love to go abroad and hang out in the Irish pubs or anything that's English, which I never understood. Like you go somewhere and you go to something that you're used to. I mean, I don't know. I don't personally understand that, but that's what especially the Anglo-Saxons like to do.
Reason people are judging me for this, but I want to know what a macaron tastes like at a French McDonald's. I'm curious, is it good? Is it bad? Should I buy it again? Speaking of restaurants, prepare yourself that the service will be just okay. They will not go above and beyond to please your every need. They might not be fast and they might not be friendly. They are humans that have emotions and down days and are not full of energy all the time. And they will leave you alone to eat your food and might not check up on you at all. I've been to plenty of cafes and restaurants where they did have very friendly and good service, but not all of them will be like this. And so just be mentally prepared that they will not take your dish back and give you a refund if you just don't like it. You'll just have to pick something better next time. Then also we have tipping. In most countries, waiters receive...
That's very true. Very true, even in Slovakia. It varies, it really does. And it's actually very spot on what she described.
A fair minimum wage. But it's still minimum wage, so it's quite low. So we do like tipping, but just 5 to 10%. A more modest tip. Or you just round off the bill that the number looks nice.
Yeah.
But the tipping etiquette can be different for each country. For example, in Germany, you tip when you pay. But in France, you leave a tip on the table when you leave and already paid. What I hear a lot of people from America living or visiting Europe say that we don't have good Mexican food. And it's true, because Mexico is right here, right next to the United States. And Mexico is pretty far away from Europe. So not a lot of people that know how to cook good Mexican food come to Europe to open Mexican restaurants. And that makes sense because we have a whole ocean between us. Don't get me wrong, I would love to go to a Mexican restaurant, but I don't even know how good Mexican food tastes like because I've never been to Mexico. Because again, it's pretty far away. So maybe you should implement geography classes into your school education. Just saying. When visiting restaurants, cafes, and other public places, it is important for us to be spatially aware and not be too loud. Americans have a reputation here in Europe that they're loud and annoying. Maybe they're not necessarily American, they might be Canadian, but just be aware of the situation, if it's quiet or not, and how loud you're speaking. Especially in countries like Germany, they take it really seriously and they will point it out that you're being too loud. Now, all that being said, Europe is not a perfect place. We have a lot of issues of our own. Europe is considered to be pretty safe from the rest of the world, but we still have crimes here. And as I said before, Sweden, I'm looking at you. What's happening? Especially in big cities, we have a lot of scams and pickpocketers, and Paris would be the first city that comes to mind that has this issue. Then Europe also has racial discrimination, some countries more than others. But an interesting statement that I've heard is that we dislike or have prejudices against people from other countries rather than skin color, which I think the description also fits. So we also do have our problems. So here are some of my final thoughts. Well, if you're an American living in America, you probably don't really care about the intricacies of being European and living in Europe, and that's okay. We don't know everything about you, and I don't think you should know everything about us. We have our own stuff to deal with, but I do think we can learn from each other. For example, having free public bathrooms or universal healthcare. If you're planning on visiting European countries, I would suggest just looking up some stuff about what to do or what not to do, and some little language bits and pieces of saying please and thank you. Or just in general, be more aware of your surroundings. Not just for Americans, but for anyone out there in the world.
Okay, so I'm going to pause it here. I'm just going to add on to the last two points. Loudness. I'm not aware of Americans, at least in Slovakia, being loud. I'm aware of English being loud, to the point where Slovaks don't really like the English because they come and destroy our like bars and stuff, and they're very loud. And they come here usually for the stag do's. So that's a pet peeve. Also, she talked about discrimination. Yes, that's kind of like that's a real thing. Like people, yeah, I think it's pretty accurate that you would discriminate, you know, like when you have that thing that I mentioned, like you're from Central Eastern Europe or whatever, they would like in perhaps in France and in UK for certain, they will look down upon you. So that's kind of what it looks like. For example, Czech people look down on anyone. They think that they are the center of the universe. You know, Hungarians are trying to rebuild their Hungarian empire. Like, this is what I'm trying to explain, how different it is to you saying like, oh yeah, but there are many countries within India, but there is no the understanding of India. Like every country is its own India. So yeah, it's just very different here. I hope with that I kept on, you know, interrupting the video, and I hope you did find it helpful. Feel free to let me know what was maybe a new thing for you, if you maybe try to figure out what I'm trying to say about how different Europe is to India for that matter, and you ignore the more American references. But I did hope you liked it and you found it a bit more, you know, like interesting to get to learn about Europe a bit more. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching this video with me. If you did enjoy, please give a thumbs up, share, like, and subscribe to this channel. And I'll see you next one. Until then, please do take care. I'm sending lots and lots of love. Bye-bye.